What's up, all my nostalgia? Dave here with my top 10 movies of 2024, the best movies of the year, the last of best of content from me for 2024. Of course, we did top 10 albums, top 10 songs, top 10 K-pop songs, and top 10 TV shows of the year. And movies I always do last just to give myself a little bit more time to see as much as I can. I still haven't seen everything I want to see. Of course, there are some stuff, namely a lot of international films, that have yet to even be released in the United States, even though they are 2024 movies and, in the Oscar mix this year, things like that. So my extended long list of every single movie I've seen, which is always around 100 movies every year, that will be on Letterboxd, but that'll probably not come out till next month. So if you want to see my full list of everything I liked, all the way down to the stuff I didn't even like at all, keep an eye out for that. But we had to get the top 10 out. It's a shit or get off the pot type thing every year. And I'm very happy with the movies that I saw this year. I think this is a movie year that is not the absolute best by any means. I think a pretty common theme this year has been that we're kind of lacking like really high-end masterpieces at the top, at least compared to other years. I still think it was a really good movie year because the movies I have at the top I quite enjoyed a lot. But I think maybe it starts to thin out once you get past your top 7, and extend that out to the top 20, whereas in other years maybe it's a bit deeper. Every movie on my top 10 is a movie I did a full review for when it came out, so make sure you check those out for the extended thoughts. Just going to run through the list 10 to 1 and honorable mentions. Also talk about some movies I still want to see from last year as well. So kicking things off for me is The Wild Robot from DreamWorks. This is a film that I did not have high expectations for at all. And honestly, it takes a lot for an animated film to make my top 10 list. Of course, I like animated films. However, I'm always someone who has a bias to live action and has a bias to full-fledged acting over voice acting, things like that. So it takes a lot for animated to make the list. And actually it has in recent years. The Boy and the Heron made my list last year. But The Wild Robot, I think it really stands out as an animated film. For one, the animation is absolutely gorgeous. This really is kind of a hallmark throwback to the DreamWorks of old. DreamWorks has far from been a, prolific, critically acclaimed studio in recent years, unfortunately, and largely due to financial reasons. But The Wild Robot, I think it's the movie that just engages you, its animation so beautifully. Like it's great for its intended viewers, young people, of course, but also is the animated movie that has a lot of depth and storytelling richness that engages a more adult audience as well. The themes of chosen family, some really choice moments with the score, including the song from Maren Morris. There's some, I think, really rousing stuff. There's definitely some tearjerker moments. It's a story that I think you really get swept up in, and you're really rooting for the characters you're seeing. I think it's a absolute gem. I expect it to win Best Animated Feature at the Oscars over the behemoth that is Inside Out 2. So yeah, The Wild Robot, and I would not be shocked if we get a sequel to this movie just because the strength across the board with how this movie went. And the box office success as well suggests that we'll be seeing more of this. Number 9 for me is Helena Rain's Baby Girl, starring Nicole Kidman and Harris Dickinson. Of course, this movie just came out last month, and this film, famously, it's kind of the main talking point with the movie is a throwback to a type of movie we don't make anymore, namely the erotic thriller film. Filmmaking is very chaste and conservative these days. We don't really see much portrayal of sex and nudity on screen, certainly compared to, decades past. And Baby Girl, for me, it's funny because like this is a movie that as you're watching it, there's a lot of like jaw dropping moments. There's a lot of like, what is going on? And like, there's a lot of trying to wrap your head around the decision making with the characters. And this is certainly not a movie that I have like no notes for at all. I definitely had some questions with how things were presented in this movie, but man, I think just the chemistry between Nicole Kim and Harris Dickinson and the really specificity that I find in a lot of their characters, like Kidman, she plays, older, middle-aged, successful women all the time lately, right? And yet this still feels like something a little bit different from her, right? In this case, a CEO who projects one thing and then in her private life is actually seeking something completely different. And Harris Dickinson as this young intern character that is incredibly hard to pin down. And I love how this movie makes the complication of these characters' feelings like part of the actual storytelling, where neither party knows exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it, what's happening. And I love that that confusion is presented from the character POV, because often you're feeling that as a viewer as well. And yeah, I think Harris Dickinson, he just has a unique energy and aura to him, and he's able to really imbue that in this movie. Number 8 for me is A Complete Unknown from James Mangold, starring Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan. A Complete Unknown, it is a conventional music biopic film in most respects, and yet it's an incredibly effective and satisfying execution of that. Just because the film's structure is familiar does not take anything away from what this movie is able to achieve. And what is that communicating to us? Well, frankly, I think it's making a really compelling story out of a musical figure that not a lot of people in today's world have a lot of a connection to. Of course, we're talking about Bob Dylan in the 60s. This is not a time that most moviegoers were around for. And Bob Dylan is certainly several generations in the past in terms of being like a huge figure musically, right? And yet, this movie gets you so wrapped up in his story. And of course, a big part of that is Chalamet's performance as Bob Dylan, something that could have went horribly wrong, but it does not really at all. The movie's able to communicate the sophistication, the power of Bob Dylan's impeccable songwriting. And when you see several Bob Dylan songs performed on screen in this film, you feel that energy. I think the times they're changing scene at Newport is really powerful. Chalamet's performance played off of Monica Barbaro's Joan Baez's performance is absolutely electric, like star-making potential. The way those two look at each other in this movie is incredible stuff. Number 7 for me is Sing Sing, starring Coleman Domingo and Clarence Macklin. This is a film that, I obviously was not really on my radar at all until you started hearing a lot of that early hype in the beginning of the year. And Coleman Domingo, of course, has been on quite the run, and that certainly continues in this movie. He is a screen presence unto himself, just in terms of his power, in terms of his stature, his eloquence, his way with words. He's an awesome actor, and this character that he's able to imbue, of course, someone who, in their eyes, the movie doesn't really take much of a POV, but in their eyes, has been wrongfully imprisoned, is now seeking parole, but in the meantime, is very involved in this, rehabilitation quote unquote program within Sing Sing prison, where select inmates are able to perform theater as a way of self expression while they're, still locked up. And played off of that, of course, is Clarence Macklin's character, and Clarence Macklin, of course, is a new actor, as are just about everyone else in this cast. And that's, I think, what's so kind of beautiful about this movie is you have all these men playing lightly fictionalized versions of themselves. None of these guys are professional actors, but you would not know it in the slightest watching them. It just feels so real, so authentic. And this is just a movie about, I think, great acting, excellent writing at every turn, just a really powerful story, and it's executed on incredibly well. And I think it's awesome that you have like Coleman Domingo, who has a lot of juice these days, right? Able to use a lot of his creative power to make this story happen, and they do it with great effect. It's a great movie, and it sounds like it's picking up steam, for the Oscars, which is great to see. Number 6 for me is Civil War from Alex Garland, starring Wagner Moore, Kaylee Spaney, Jesse Plemons, Kirsten Dunst. This is the second highest grossing A24 film of all time, behind Everything Everywhere. And yeah, I mean, I've been a big Alex Garland fan. I think everything he does is, at minimum, worthy of consideration, worth watching, and a lot of his work is obviously impeccable stuff. Looking for the Ex Machina. Been a big fan of his for some time. Ex Machina was on my top 10 films of the last decade. And Civil War, I think this movie, had some polarizing aspects to it, but a lot of that to me was completely off base because it was not the point of this movie at all. What I love most about Civil War is the ambiguity in its storytelling. It has no interest in telling you why this version of America has descended into civil war, why various parts of the country are aligned and against another, why is Nick Offerman's president character in process of being deposed by this rival faction. That plot detail, not important in this movie. This is a film that's more invested in, I think, the really murky gray of what its characters are doing within it. And journalistic ethics, in particular, I think really comes to surface with this. I think there's a really cinematic scene in like the beginning of Act Two, I want to say, where our characters are watching a like raid happen between the two sides. Where one side is killing the other, and what do you film? What do you see? Do you intervene? All those thoughts are in your head. Like, should I even be watching this unfold? Things like that, right? And Jesse Plemons, I mean, his, kind of iconic, instant classic, one scene role in this film, the line from the trailer, yeah, but what kind of American are you? Really incredibly effective stuff. And yeah, I mean, I think just from an action perspective, when you do see that action, that like pure conflict, that stuff's really good. The production is huge. It's the biggest movie Garland's ever made, obviously. The fact that Civil War doesn't have a conclusive statement to say, to me, is the point of this movie and why the movie is successful. That has not been the case for everyone who's seen it, but I really like the movie and I really responded to it. Number 5 for me is Nickel Boys from Ramel Ross, of course, adaptation of Colson Whitehead novel. And I think now we're in the top 5. This is like, these are like objectively great pieces of work that we got last year. And with Nickel Boys, this is a movie that I was lucky enough to see early and I knew there was a lot of hype and anticipation. Of course, Colson Whitehead's work needs no introduction. I loved the adaptation of his Underground Railroad that we got from Barry Jenkins on Amazon in TV form a few years ago. That was absolutely insane. So good. So I was obviously anticipating anything else that of his would be adapted. And Nickel Boys, when I first saw it, after I saw it, I was a bit, I wasn't mixed on it, but I was a bit parsing of my thoughts. I wasn't quite sure what to take away from it. And once you really sit down and think about what you have seen, the brilliance, the impeccable craft of the movie really stands out. And the process of watching, you're like, wow, this movie is unlike just about anything else I've seen. I mean, Nickel Boys is shot entirely in first person point of view. And when it introduces its second character, the movie completely blossoms, and you get to see everything that you hadn't seen before, namely your first POV's character's reaction and appearance and things like that. And I just think like the technique in terms of how this movie is framed and goes about its story visually is done really well. It's not a gimmick at any point in time. And of course, the subject matter, unsurprisingly, Whitehead adaptation, really prescient, incredibly relevant to today. Of course, this movie set in the past down in Florida, and its subject matter, I think, is just really rich. And obviously, there's stuff that's hard to watch about this. The movie, I think, makes a point of shying away from like showing anything overtly super violent and depressing, which is certainly a change from how the Underground Railroad show was depicted. And even more so, impressive wise, the fact that Ramel Ross is a first-time feature film director. His previous work was a documentary. Then he actually got approached by, I think it was Plan B, to adapt this novel, which I think really just speaks to his talent. He's someone who doesn't even seem necessarily like fixated on making more features in the future, but I think we definitely should root for that because there was just such clear, I think, storytelling choice and command on display with this. It's really unlike anything else I've seen this year. Number 4 for me is Anora from Sean Baker. Man, what can you say about this movie? This movie might win Best Picture. And I think the lead, Mikey Madison, is a lock for Best Actress. She's absolutely knockout the entire time in this movie. And Nora absolutely rips because it's both incredibly dramatic and serious and at times very dark and depressing in terms of what it says about class and society and what you can and can't do to improve your station in that system. And it also has just amazing humor, particularly in its second act. Some of the best line readings, just the funniest physical comedy. This movie basically has everything. By all respects, it's the biggest film Sean Baker's ever made, and it's kind of like a conclusion or like the final form of a lot of the ideas that he has put forth in his other movies. Most recently was Red Rocket, and before that, the Florida Project. Like he's been kind of operating in this area, namely people kind of living on the fringes of the system and just getting by and things like that. But to me, like this is his most complete statement yet, and it also happens to be just an incredibly entertaining movie the entire time. And once the ensemble begins to increase as Anora's newly wed husband, of course, the son of a Russian oligarch. Once that family and that family's employees decide to annul this marriage by any cost, I mean, the hijinks ensue, and the hijinks are so damn good. It's just a really spectacular movie. Number 3 for me is Challengers from Luca Guadagnino, starring Zendaya, Josh O'Connor, and Mike Faist. Man, I mean, this movie came out a while ago at this point. This came out at the beginning of the year in April, and was, of course, strike delayed. Was supposed to come out, fall 23. As we know, as a result, Luca also released another movie later this year in Queer, of course. But Challengers, man, I think this is a movie that will have a reputation that never goes away. This movie was pretty successful, but not a massive hit. Um, but I think this movie culturally will always resonate. And it's on one hand an excellent sports movie, but also equally a movie that's not actually interested in the sports depicting. It's more interest about character dynamics and power, and also perhaps our greatest example of the evolution of the power of the musical score within a movie. The score from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is a central aspect of what's happening in Challengers, unlike basically any other movie's score in recent memory. The rhythm and the power and the point of view of Challengers would not exist without the strength of its instantly classic, iconic score. I also think this will probably go down as one of the great Zendaya roles. Of course, Tashi Duncan to me is so memorable work from her, someone who, this tennis prodigy whose career gets taken away due to injury, and then her lust for achieving that ultimate greatness because she was the ultimate competitor. She does the only thing she can, which is find someone else to achieve that dream on her behalf. And thus, the love triangle at the core of this movie, I think, really compels. I think Josh O'Connor, in particular, showed us a lot with this movie. Definitely a different side than what he had previously given us on Netflix's The Crown. And the way he plays off Mike Faist, the way he plays off Zendaya, the push-pull of this movie, the rhythm of it, all the way up to the final shot and where that goes. The filmmaking that they use to simulate tennis shots going back and forth, even though it's not actually real. I mean, I loved everything about this movie. I think it's also probably one of the most rewatchable movies of the year. A true banger. And number 2 for me is Dune Part 2 from Denis Villeneuve, starring Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Florence Pugh, Javier Bardem, Rebecca Ferguson. The list goes on. The cast is amazing. How can I forget Austin Butler, obviously? Dune Part 2 is pure gas, and not just any gas. I'm talking pure kerosene, the most flammable fuel on this planet. Talk about leveling up with a sequel in every way humanly possible. That's what this movie does. The production design, the sound design, the score, which of course is really a continuation of the last score, the acting talent, the acting diversity, the bench of talent with the acting. Everything about this movie is just completely world class. And you're getting that in a franchise IP movie. And what this movie does is it puts to shame basically any other IP movie we get nowadays. Because this shows what can be achieved with that much care and attention paid to the craft. The movie, of course, shot on location, looks spectacular. You know what's really cool about Arrakis? The fact that they filmed it in Jordan. And it looks so cool. The scene where Paul Atreides rides Shai Hulud for the first time. I mean, seeing that scene in IMAX for the first time was unforgettable. Just such powerful stuff. What I also loved about this movie, and I think was one of the great choices with how Dune is being filmed, was the kind of increasing prominence of the Chani character played by Zendaya. Because as a result, what do we get out of that? Oh, we get Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya playing off of each other. And when they sit next to each other on the dune and look at each other and then kiss and fall in love, and as the music swells, that is just pure movie star shit that you can't teach. And that's the kind of thing we want to see when we go to the movies and we see these big bombastic stories. Austin Butler, newcomer for Dune Part 2, unforgettable as Fade Ralpha. So good. And what a W for him to follow up Elvis with another intentional voice work that he did with this movie. Sequence after sequence, I think choice after choice, this movie just astounds and wows. I've seen it multiple times. I think Dune Messiah has a lot to live up to because that's a story that's a lot less conventional than the conclusion of the original Dune book, as we know. So we'll see what happens with that in a few years. But man, I think Dune Part 2 is just a total triumph and really goes to show you like what can be achieved with IP storytelling when you really put some care into the creation. And of course, when I saw Dune Part 2 at the beginning of the year, I knew it was going to be tough for that movie to be surpassed for my number one. And maybe, in the years to come, I'll have more fondness for Dune Part 2 over time. It's definitely a movie I will not be forgetting. Same thing with Challengers. But my number one is a movie that I was lucky enough to see a bit earlier before it came out. And, at the conclusion of this movie, I was like, you know what? Like, that's a movie that has just such obvious, yes, but grand ambition in terms of being the next great work in our film fabric. And that, of course, is The Brutalist from Brady Corbet, the 3.5 hour epic about the American dream and what you can and can't achieve with that. I mean, this is a film that has some polarization. I think some people can find aspects of it pretentious. I think some people can find the takeaways in what Corbet is trying to say about artists and what they can and can't do with their art and who can tell them what to do and who can and can't compromise that vision. I can understand people bristling at some aspects of that, but to me, I think just the sheer scope of what this movie has within it, just as a pure story, but then all that subtext about what it represents is probably what I'll remember most about the movie. And God, I mean, if you learn more about it, and Corbet has been very forthcoming in telling us about this process, but the fact that this movie took so long to get to the screen, the fact that it was shot on a dead film format in VistaVision, and yet it looks incredible with a pretty modest budget under 20 million. Like, we were able to see the grand creations of architect Laszlo Toth, Adrian Brody's character, but they didn't actually build any of that in real life. Like, it's I think a modern marvel in terms of like what can be achieved with a film budget. I think of like what was done with Gareth Edwards, the creator, last year in terms of making a $200 million sci-fi movie for only 80 million, and like how great that movie looks. The other side of that coin is what the Brutalist is able to do. This movie that's able to shot in film in a dead format at that and still not be expensive. As a film itself, though, again, like it's so grand and epic in terms of what this story goes through, and it's long spanning, decades spanning by the end, and the ups and the downs of its characters, of how you're feeling watching the movie. The first half, things are going well. You're really invested. Guy Pearce's Van Buren character, the benefactor, really incredible performance from Pierce. Again, you're feeling good. And in that second half of the movie, things begin to turn. Maybe you saw some of that coming. To me, this is just, I think, the richest and the grandest and then the largest of movies this year. And it's not empty at any turn. I think there's so much to take away and look at, again, whether it's the impeccable production choices or the subtext under the storytelling, or just the pure story itself, which is a classic rise and fall type story. Like, I found it really satisfying by the end. And yeah, it's long, and yeah, it has a built-in intermission break, which was quite cool to see. The movie on film, literally watching the film stock show us the intermission until it ended, like that was pretty sick. But yeah, I mean, this is the movie that I want to win Best Picture. Of course, I would not be shocked if Anora wins, and I'll be happy if either one wins, of course. If Wicked wins, that would be a little disappointing given the other choices, and I did like Wicked. But yeah, The Brutalist. This is a movie that's not for everyone, of course, due to how serious it is most of the time and how long the movie is. But you just don't get stories like this, and it's impressive work. I can't wait to see what Brady Corbet is able to do next. Obviously, he should have a lot more rope, creatively and monetarily after this. We've come a long way since his last movie, Fox Lux, after all. So yeah, The Brutalist, number one for me. And just to recap, my top 10 movies of 2024: number 10, The Wild Robot; number 9, Baby Girl; Number 8, A Complete Unknown. Number 7, Sing Sing. Number 6, Civil War. Number 5, Nickel Boys. Number 4, Anora. Number 3, Challengers. Number 2, Dune Part 2. And number 1, the best movie of the year, The Brutalist. Please let me know what were your best movies of the year. So that's the top 10. Of course, I've seen many other films, and I'm still planning to see a bunch more. In terms of stuff that just missed a cut, I want to shout out Justin Kurzel's The Order, which I thought was excellent and is a bit underseen. Love that. Like Conclave quite a bit. I liked We Live in Time. I like Saturday Night. I liked Furiosa. I think it'll probably be underrated when all things are all said and done. I love Twisters. That was such a great time. Alien Romulus. So happy to see a great alien movie again. I loved it. Jury Number 2, A Real Pain. Awards contenders, good stuff there. I loved Hitman on Netflix with Glenn Powell. And before we get to some of the stuff that I still want to see that I haven't seen yet, just want to look at the bottom of my list real quick. So my bottom 5 right now, the worst movies I've seen of the year. And these will probably stay there. I don't know if I'm not going to make time to see anything that's going to be at the bottom here. The worst movies I saw this year were Borderlands, Madam Web, Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and Craven the Hunter. And apologies to movies that just missed that bottom 5 cut. Argyle, Back to Black, Red 1, Kung Fu Panda 4, Venom 3. Yeah, some stinkers. In terms of movies I still need to see, it's primarily, stuff from international movies that were the release, unsurprisingly, is trickled out and usually doesn't come out in the United States till January, February time. So movies like I'm Not There from Brazil, All We Imagine Is Light, The Seed of the Sacred Fig, Italy's Vermiglio. Those are all on my list. I want to see those. I want to see Cloud from Japan. That has not been released here at all. That would be cool. I still haven't seen September 5. I'll be seeing that in a few days. It's finally coming out after a constantly pushed back and strange award strategy with its release. So I'll finally see September 5. So, that's a movie that very well could make the top 20 for all we know. But hey, they took too long, so it can't make the top 10. Like I said, make sure you check out my Letterboxd list for the entire list, 1 through however many movies I see, around 100 every year. Check that out so you can see the full ranking of everything when that'll come out sometime next month. Of course, go back and check top 10 TV shows and my top 10 music lists from 2024 as well. And if you like movies, well, stick around, subscribe, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, because I love movies. I see about 100 new movies every year, most of which in the theater. I make a point of reviewing movies when they come out and talking about them. It's a big part of my life. So if that speaks to you, come back, because we'll be talking about movies as they come out next year, or this year as well, 2025. Make sure you let me know what your best movies of the year were as well, and I'll see you next time.